He fixed motorcycles with nothing but rusted tools, a cramped garage, and a teenage son who helped after school. Every day was a struggle until a woman on a broken-down Harley rolled into his life, hiding more than just engine trouble. What happened next changed everything he thought he knew about second chances and the kind of wealth that can't be measured in dollars. Graham Parker had spent years keeping vintage bikes alive in the forgotten corner of Millbrook Valley, barely scraping by while teaching his son the value of hard work and honest repair. But when Vivian Palmer walked into his shop with oil-stained hands and a mysterious smile, claiming her grandfather's Harley had given up on a cross-country journey, Graham had no idea he was about to meet the secret heiress to the Harley-Davidson empire, or that she was searching for something money couldn't buy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the narrow alley behind Elm Street, where Graham Parker's motorcycle shop sat wedged between a laundromat and a discount grocery store like a forgotten relic from another era. Parker's cycle repair wasn't much to look at. Faded green paint peeling from wooden siding, a hand-painted sign that had seen better decades, and windows so grimy they filtered the morning sunlight into a perpetual golden haze. Inside the cramped garage, Graham crouched beside a 1987 Honda Shadow, his weathered hands working a stubborn bolt that had probably been rusted in place since the Clinton administration. At 42, he carried the kind of tiredness that sleep couldn't fix, the weight of unpaid bills, mounting rent, and the constant worry that came with raising a 16-year-old son on a motorcycle mechanic's income in a world that seemed to prefer throwing things away rather than fixing them. The shop smelled like motor oil, old leather, and the faint trace of coffee that had been reheated too many times. Every surface was covered with parts in various stages of repair or disrepair, carburetors soaking in cleaning fluid, spark plugs lined up like tiny soldiers, brake cables coiled and tagged with handwritten notes in Graham's careful block letters. A transistor radio, held together with electrical tape and hope, played classic rock from its perch on a shelf made from an old motorcycle gas tank. "Dad," the Henderson account called again, said Julian, Graham's son, as he emerged from the tiny office in the back. Julian had his father's dark hair and steady hands, but where Graham moved with the measured pace of experience, Julian carried the restless energy of youth, always sketching custom bike designs in the margins of his homework, always asking when he could drop out of school to work full-time in the shop. Graham looked up from the Honda, a streak of grease across his cheek. What did Mrs. Henderson say this time? Her Sportster's making that clicking noise again. She wants to know if you can look at it Thursday, but... Julian hesitated, fidgeting with a wrench. She also asked about payment plans. Again. Graham nodded slowly. Mrs. Henderson was 73, lived on Social Security, and her 1995 Sportster was her only transportation to the grocery store and her doctor's appointments. She'd been bringing the bike to Graham for 6 years, ever since her husband passed, and Graham had never once charged her full price. He couldn't bring himself to do it. "Tell her Thursday's fine," Graham said, "and don't worry about the payment. We'll figure something out." Julian frowned. "Dad, we can't keep..." "We'll figure something out," Graham repeated, his tone gentle but firm. It was a conversation they'd had dozens of times, and Julian knew better than to push. His father had never turned away anyone who needed help, even when the shop's checking account had more dust than dollars. The truth was, Parker's cycle repair was barely surviving. The big dealerships had taken most of the new bike sales and warranty work. Chain shops handled the quick oil changes and tire replacements. What came to Graham were the hard cases, the vintage bikes that other shops wouldn't touch, the custom jobs that required more patience than profit. The desperate riders who needed their bikes running but couldn't afford dealer prices. Graham worked 7 days a week, often until well past dark, his hands permanently stained with grease no amount of scrubbing could remove. He'd taught himself motorcycle repair, watching his own father work on cars in this same building 30 years ago, back when Elm Street was the heart of Millbrook Valley's small business district. Now half the storefronts were empty, their windows papered with for lease signs that had faded from white to yellow to brown. The rent on the shop had doubled in the past 5 years as developers eyed the neighborhood for revitalization. Graham's landlord, a real estate investment company from 3 states away, had made it clear that Parker's cycle repair didn't fit their vision for the area's future. Every month, Graham wrote the check and wondered if it would be the last one he could afford. Julian returned to his homework at the small desk in the corner, surrounded by motorcycle magazines and college brochures that Graham pretended not to notice him hiding. The boy was smart. Honor roll smart, scholarship smart, but he'd rather be elbow deep in an engine than sitting in a classroom. Graham understood the feeling, but he also knew that intelligence without opportunity was like a motorcycle without. You fuel, it might look impressive, but it wouldn't take you anywhere. The Honda's engine finally surrendered its secrets, and Graham allowed himself a small smile as the bolt came loose. Small victories counted for something in this business. He'd learned to celebrate them when they came, because they were often the only victories available. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the alley, and Graham could hear the distant hum of traffic from the main highway that bypassed Millbrook Valley entirely these days. Time was, that highway brought travelers through town, some of them riders who needed repairs or just wanted to browse the local shops. Now, the interstate had pulled all that business north, leaving places like Millbrook Valley to slowly fade. Like old photographs left in the sun, Graham wiped his hands on a shop rag that had seen better years and looked around his domain. Every tool had a story, every bike had a history. The 1962 Triumph Bonneville in the corner belonged to Mr. Chen, who brought it in every spring for a tune-up, even though he hadn't ridden it in 5 years. The Kawasaki Ninja, against the far wall, was Julian's project, a salvage bike they were rebuilding together on weekends, teaching the boy that patience and persistence could bring anything back to life. "You know," Julian said without looking up from his textbook, "Tommy Rodriguez's dad offered me a job at his construction company. $20 an hour, cash." Graham's hands stilled on the wrench. Tommy Rodriguez's father owned the biggest construction outfit in the county, and $20 an hour was more than Graham could afford to pay his son. "That's good money," he said carefully. "I told him I'd think about it." Graham nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. Julian was 16, old enough to make his own decisions, old enough to see the financial strain his father carried, like a heavy backpack. The boy wanted to help, wanted to contribute, wanted to ease the burden that kept Graham awake most nights, staring at the ceiling and calculating bills. "Whatever you decide," Graham said finally, "I'm proud of you." The radio crackled and shifted to a Bob Seger song, Like a Rock, and Graham couldn't help but appreciate the irony. He felt anything but solid these days, more like water trying to hold its shape against a current that grew stronger every month. But he kept working, kept fixing, kept believing that honest work and fair dealing still meant something in a world that seemed to value neither. As the day wore on and the shadows grew longer, Graham found himself thinking about the road not taken, the corporate job offer he'd turned down 15 years ago, the chance to move to a bigger city where motorcycle mechanics made decent money. He'd chosen to stay in Millbrook Valley because it was home, because Julian was settled in school, because someone needed to keep the old bikes running for people who couldn't afford to replace them. Now, watching his son struggle with homework, under the light of a desk lamp that flickered with age, Graham wondered if staying had been the right choice after all. Love and loyalty were admirable qualities, but they didn't pay rent or put food on the table or send bright teenagers to college. The Honda Shadow purred to life on the first try, its engine running smooth and strong. Graham smiled despite everything. Some things, at least, could still be fixed. That evening, after Julian had gone upstairs to finish his homework, Graham sat alone in the shop's small office, surrounded by towers of invoices and repair manuals that had become his evening companions. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light over the scattered papers, creating an island of clarity in the growing darkness. On the wall behind him hung a photograph he rarely looked at anymore, but never moved. A picture of him and Sarah on their wedding day, both of them straddling a restored 1971 Harley shovelhead that had belonged to her father. Sarah. Even now, 3 years after the cancer took her, Graham could still smell her perfume in certain corners of the shop, still hear her laugh echoing from the rafters where she used to sit and read while he worked late into the night. She'd been the business mind behind Parker's Cycle Repair, the one who handled the books, managed the inventory, and somehow made their meager income stretch to cover both necessities and the occasional small luxury that made life worth living. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd also been the dreamer in their partnership. While Graham focused on the nuts and bolts of keeping motorcycles running, Sarah had envisioned something bigger, a community hub where riders could gather, where vintage bike enthusiasts could share stories, where the lost art of motorcycle restoration could be passed down to a new generation. She'd sketched plans for expanding the shop, adding a small cafe, creating workshop spaces for people to work on their own bikes under Graham's guidance. "We're not just fixing motorcycles," she used to say, usually while perched on the edge of his workbench with a cup of coffee in her hands. "We're preserving a way of life, keeping a connection to the road that these big corporations want to sanitize and package." The manila folder on Graham's desk contained the remnants of those dreams, architectural sketches, business loan applications that had been approved but never used, letters from motorcycle clubs expressing interest in Sarah's workshop concept. After her diagnosis, they'd put everything on hold, focusing instead on treatments, hospitals, and the desperate hope that love and determination could somehow tip the scales against an enemy they couldn't see or fight with conventional tools. Graham opened the folder and traced his finger along Sarah's handwriting on one of the sketches. Her script had been bold and confident, the writing of someone who believed in possibilities even when the evidence suggested otherwise. She'd labeled one section Community Learning Bay and another Heritage Restoration Center. At the bottom of the page, she'd written a note in the margin, places where people remember that working with your hands isn't just a job, it's a way of touching the world. The medical bills had consumed their savings first, then their credit, then finally their hope for expansion. Even with insurance, the treatments had cost more than the shop made in 2 years. Graham had sold Sarah's personal bike collection, pieces that had taken her a decade to assemble, to pay for experimental treatments that ultimately bought them 6 more months together instead of the miracle they'd prayed for. Julian had been 13 when his mother died, old enough to understand death, but young enough to still believe that fathers could fix anything if they tried hard enough. Graham remembered the night he'd had to tell his son that all the tools in the world couldn't repair what was broken in Sarah's body. Julian had nodded solemnly, then asked if they could work on a motorcycle together, something to keep their hands busy while their hearts learned how to beat differently. That project, the salvage Kawasaki Ninja that still sat in the corner of the shop, had become their shared language of grief. They worked on it together every weekend, teaching each other patience and persistence, while slowly building something beautiful from broken pieces. Julian had inherited his mother's eye for detail and his father's mechanical intuition. But more than that, He'd inherited Sarah's belief that broken things could be made whole again with enough care and attention. The shop itself told the story of their journey. The newer equipment, the hydraulic lift, the computerized diagnostic tools, the air compressor that didn't sound like a dying whale, had all been purchased during the brief period when business was good, and Sarah's business acumen had attracted customers from 3 counties away. The older tools, the ones Graham had inherited from his father and grandfather, carried different stories: Depression-era ingenuity, post-war optimism, the steady accumulation of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Graham's father, Franklin, had opened the shop in 1962, initially as an automotive garage that gradually specialized in motorcycles as the culture of riding evolved from practical transportation to lifestyle choice. Franklin had served in Korea, came home with a deep appreciation for mechanical precision and the therapeutic value of work that produced tangible results. He taught Graham that a good mechanic didn't just fix problems. He listened to what the machine was trying to say, understood its history, respected its purpose. Every bike has a story, Franklin used to say, while showing young Graham how to read the wear patterns on brake pads or interpret the color of spark plugs. Our job isn't to erase that story, it's to help the story continue. After Franklin's death from a heart attack 10 years ago, Graham had found boxes of meticulously kept repair records dating back to the shop's earliest days. Each entry included not just technical notes, but personal observations. Mrs. Rodriguez's Sportster pulls left because she's afraid of leaning into curves since her accident. Tommy Chen's dirt bike runs rich because he's trying to impress his girlfriend with loud exhaust notes. The records revealed a man who understood that fixing motorcycles meant understanding the people who rode them. Now, sitting in the same chair where his father had reconciled accounts by hand and his wife had dreamed of expansion, Graham felt the weight of accumulated responsibility. Julian needed college opportunities that Millbrook Valley couldn't provide. The shop needed investment to survive the changing marketplace. The community needed gathering places that honored its working-class heritage while adapting to economic realities. But most nights, like tonight, Graham felt like he was trying to hold back the tide with a wrench and a prayer. The photograph on the wall caught his eye again. Sarah's radiant smile, her hand resting on the shovelhead's fuel tank, her eyes bright with possibilities that had never quite materialized. Below the photo, tucked into the frame, was a business card she'd had printed but never used. Sarah Parker, Community Relations Director, Parker's Cycle Repair and Heritage Center. Graham pulled the card from the frame and turned it over. In her handwriting on the back, she'd written, "For when we're ready to be bigger than our fears." He looked around the shop, at Julian's homework spread across the corner desk, at the vintage bikes waiting for parts they might never receive, at the computer that crashed twice a week, and the coffee maker that only worked if you hit it in exactly the right spot. Everything felt held together by determination and electrical tape, sustained by stubbornness and the fading hope that honest work still meant something in a world increasingly dominated by algorithms and efficiency metrics. Tomorrow would bring another day of impossible choices: which bills to pay, which repairs to prioritize, how to balance his son's need for stability against his own need to maintain the family legacy. Graham had learned to take life one day at a time, one repair at a time, one small victory at a time. But tonight, holding Sarah's business card in his oil-stained fingers, he allowed himself to remember what it felt like to believe in something bigger than survival. Tomorrow could bring its own challenges. Tonight, he would sit with his memories and his dreams, surrounded by the tools and stories that connected him to the past and pointed toward a future that still seemed as distant as the horizon on a long, straight road. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything seem possible, at least until reality had time to settle in. Graham was already 3 hours into his workday, wrestling with a particularly stubborn carburetor on a 1985 Honda Rebel when the distinctive rumble of a Harley-Davidson engine echoed down Elm Street. The sound was different from the usual traffic, deeper, more intentional, with the irregular rhythm that suggested mechanical distress. He looked up from his work just as the bike rounded the corner and came into view. Even from a distance, Graham could tell it was something special. The motorcycle was a vintage Harley, probably from the late 70s or early 80s, with the kind of classic lines that modern manufacturers tried to recreate but never quite captured. The deep blue paint job caught the morning sunlight like water, and the chrome exhaust pipes gleamed despite the obvious signs of a long journey. But it was the sound that told the real story. The engine coughed and sputtered, running on what seemed like hope and determination rather than proper combustion. Smoke trailed from the exhaust, and even at idle, Graham could hear the telltale clicking that meant serious internal trouble. This bike was in pain. The rider pulled into the small parking area in front of Parker's cycle repair and shut off the engine with obvious relief. For a moment, the sudden silence felt almost oppressive after the struggle of the failing motor. Then the rider dismounted, pulling off a matte black helmet to reveal shoulder-length auburn hair and the kind of face that belonged in old photographs. Timeless, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes that suggested stories worth telling. She was probably in her early 40s, wearing well-worn leather riding gear that had clearly seen thousands of miles. Her boots were scuffed, her jacket bore the subtle marks of road experience, and her gloves were oil-stained in the way that came from hands-on motorcycle maintenance rather than casual weekend rides. Everything about her suggested a serious rider, someone who lived on two wheels rather than just visiting that world occasionally. "Please tell me you're open," she called out as she walked toward the shop, her voice carrying a slight rasp that hinted at too many mornings started with strong coffee and too many nights finished around campfires. "I think my grandfather's bike just gave up on life about 2 miles back, and I've been nursing it here on prayers and stubbornness." Graham wiped his hands on his shop rag and stepped outside, immediately drawn to the Harley. Up close, it was even more impressive. A 1979 shovelhead, meticulously maintained despite its current mechanical crisis. The paint was original, the chrome had been kept mirror bright, and the leather seat showed the kind of wear that came from decades of faithful service rather than neglect. "Beautiful bike," Graham said, running his eyes over the machine with the practiced assessment of someone who understood what he was looking at. "Shovelhead 79? 78, actually," the woman replied, pulling off her riding gloves to reveal hands that were clearly familiar with tools and maintenance. "She's been in my family since new. My grandfather bought her off the showroom floor in Milwaukee, and she's been the family wanderer ever since." Graham nodded, crouching down to get a closer look at the engine. Even without starting it up, he could see several issues that needed attention. "What's she doing to you?" "Started missing about 50 miles back, then began smoking like a chimney. I've been babying her along, but I think she's finally decided she's done enough traveling for one day." The woman's tone carried genuine affection for the machine, the kind of emotional connection that Graham recognized in serious riders. "I'm hoping it's something fixable rather than something catastrophic." "I'm Graham Parker," he said, standing up and extending his hand. "This is my shop." "Vivian Palmer," she replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip that spoke of confidence and capability. "I was hoping to make it to the coast, but it looks like your town might be my stopping point for a while." Graham gestured toward the garage bay. "Let's get her inside and see what we're dealing with. Most problems look worse than they are when you're stranded on the side of the road." Together, they pushed the Harley into the shop. Vivian moved with the easy familiarity of someone accustomed to handling heavy motorcycles, and Graham noticed that she instinctively positioned herself to support the bike's weight in exactly the right spots. Not everyone knew how to move a disabled motorcycle without risking damage or injury. "How long have you been riding?" Graham asked as they maneuvered the shovelhead onto the center stand. "Since I was tall enough to reach the pegs," Vivian replied with a smile that transformed her weathered features. "My grandfather taught me on this same bike when I was 12. Scared my parents to death, but he said anyone in the Palmer family needed to understand what real riding felt like." Julian emerged from the office where he'd been working on inventory, drawn by the sound of voices and the presence of the vintage Harley. His eyes widened when he saw the bike, and Graham could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he took in the classic lines and obvious quality of the machine. "Wow," Julian breathed, approaching the bike with the reverence due to automotive art. "This is incredible. Is that original paint?" "Every bit of it," Vivian confirmed, clearly pleased by the teenager's appreciation. "My grandfather was obsessive about maintenance. He rebuilt the engine twice, replaced the transmission once, and kept detailed records of every mile and every repair." Graham pulled out his work light and began a preliminary inspection of the engine, looking for obvious signs of trouble. "What kind of riding were you doing when she started acting up?" "Highway cruising, mostly. I've been on the road for about 2 weeks, taking the scenic route from Chicago to San Francisco. Yesterday was pretty much all interstate, steady speed. No real stress on the engine." Vivian paused, watching Graham work. "She's never given me trouble like this before. Usually she runs like a Swiss watch." As Graham examined the engine, he began to piece together the likely culprits. The smoke suggested oil consumption, probably from worn rings or valve guides. The missing could be ignition-related, possibly, sparked by the stress of sustained highway speeds after years of more leisurely riding. The shovelhead engine was notorious for certain weaknesses, but it was also one of the most repairable designs Harley had ever produced. "The good news," Graham said, straightening up from his examination, "is that I don't see anything that looks catastrophic. The bad news is that you're probably looking at some internal engine work, nothing that can't be fixed, but not something you can address with roadside adjustments." Vivian nodded, having clearly expected as much. "How long do you think?" "Depends on what we find when we dig deeper and whether I can get parts quickly. Could be a few days, could be a week." Graham paused, studying her face for signs of frustration or impatience. "I know that's not what you want to hear when you're trying to make the coast." Instead of annoyance, Vivian's expression showed something that looked almost like relief. "Actually," she said, glancing around the shop with obvious appreciation, "maybe that's exactly what I need to hear. I've been pushing pretty hard lately, trying to stay on schedule. Maybe it's time to slow down and remember what traveling is supposed to be about." Julian had been listening to the conversation while studying the Harley's details. "Are you traveling alone?" he asked, with the straightforward curiosity of youth. "Just me and whatever fits in the saddlebags," Vivian confirmed. "Sometimes the best conversations happen between you and the road." Graham found himself intrigued by this woman who traveled alone on a vintage Harley, who handled mechanical setbacks with equanimity, and who seemed to carry herself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in her own skin. There was something about her that didn't quite fit the usual profile of the riders who found their way to his shop, something he couldn't yet identify, but that made him want to know more about her story. "Well," he said, "if you're going to be stuck in Millbrook Valley for a few days, you could do worse. We've got a decent diner, a couple of antique shops, and some pretty good hiking trails if you're into that sort of thing." Vivian smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Graham caught a glimpse of something playful in her expression. "I'm into that sort of thing," she said, And I'm also into watching master craftsmen work on motorcycles that mean something. Would it be all right if I hung around while you figure out what she needs? Graham felt something flutter in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that he quickly attributed to professional pride. It had been a long time since anyone had called him a master craftsman. That would be fine, he said. In fact, it would be helpful. Nobody knows a bike better than the person who rides it. Over the next 2 hours, Graham found himself working alongside someone who understood motorcycles in a way that went beyond casual enthusiasm. Vivian didn't hover or ask obvious questions. Instead, she positioned herself where she could observe without interfering, occasionally handing him tools before he asked for them, and offering insights about the bike's history that helped Graham understand its unique characteristics. The transmission was rebuilt in 1995, she mentioned, as Graham examined the primary drive. My grandfather kept all the receipts. The shop in Milwaukee used upgraded bearings that weren't in the original spec, but they were supposed to last longer. Graham nodded, appreciating the information. That explains why the shifting feels so smooth, despite the age. Whoever did that work knew what they were doing. Everything about this bike was done right, Vivian said with obvious pride. My grandfather was the kind of man who believed in quality over convenience. He'd rather save up for the right part than install something cheaper that might cause problems later. As they worked, Julian gradually joined their conversation, initially shy, but increasingly engaged as Vivian treated his questions with the same seriousness she brought to his father's. Technical observations. When Julian asked about the bike's cross-country performance, Vivian launched into detailed explanations of highway cruising techniques, wind management, and the art of reading weather patterns from the saddle. The thing about long-distance riding, she explained, while Julian took notes in a small notebook he'd produced from somewhere, is that it's not really about the destination. It's about becoming part of the landscape, learning to read the road the way sailors read the sea. Graham found himself listening as much as working, drawn into descriptions of sunrise over mountain passes, the way different regions smelled from a motorcycle seat, and the particular satisfaction of earning each mile through skill and attention rather than passive observation from inside a car. Have you always traveled alone? Julian asked with the directness that teenagers brought to personal questions. Vivian paused, her hands stilling on the tool she'd been cleaning. Not always, she said finally, but I've learned that the best traveling companions are the ones who understand when you need silence and when you need conversation. This old girl, she patted the Harley's fuel tank affectionately, has perfect timing for both. Around noon, Graham suggested they break for lunch. The local diner was only 2 blocks away, and he found himself wanting to continue the conversation away from the mechanical distractions of the shop. Vivian accepted the invitation with enthusiasm, and Julian begged off to meet friends, leaving the 2 adults to walk through Millbrook Valley's modest downtown. The diner, Murphy's Place, had been serving the same menu for 30 years, which meant the coffee was strong, the portions were generous, and the atmosphere carried the comfortable weight of routine. Graham chose a booth near the window where they could watch the sparse midday traffic, and Vivian settled across from him with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in unfamiliar surroundings. So, she said after they'd ordered, how long have you been keeping vintage bikes alive in Millbrook Valley? About 15 years on my own, Graham replied. But this was my father's shop before that, and my grandfather worked on cars in the same building before motorcycles became our specialty. I guess you could say it's been a family tradition of fixing things that other people have given up on. Vivian smiled at that. There's something beautiful about that kind of continuity. My family has a similar relationship with motorcycles, though from a different angle. What kind of angle? Well, Vivian said, stirring cream into her coffee with thoughtful precision, Let's just say motorcycles have been central to the Palmer family story for several generations. My great-grandfather was actually involved in the early days of American motorcycle manufacturing, back when the industry was just figuring out what it wanted to become. Graham raised an eyebrow. Manufacturing? That's interesting. Was he an engineer, among other things? Vivian's answer was vague, but her tone suggested there were stories behind the brevity. He believed that motorcycles represented something essential about American independence. The idea that you could go anywhere, do anything, as long as you had the skills and determination to keep your machine running. Their food arrived: meatloaf and mashed potatoes for Graham, a turkey sandwich for Vivian, and the conversation shifted to more immediate topics. Vivian asked about the challenges of running a small motorcycle shop in an era of corporate dealerships and online parts suppliers. Graham found himself sharing more than he usually did with customers, talking about the delicate balance between preserving traditional craft skills and adapting to modern business realities. The hardest part, he admitted, is that the people who really understand what we do are getting older, and the younger generation mostly wants convenience over quality. I fix a lot of bikes for riders who learned to wrench in the 70s and 80s, but I don't see many teenagers who want to spend their weekends rebuilding carburetors. Except Julian, Vivian observed. Except Julian, Graham agreed. But he's got the intelligence to do anything he wants. Sometimes I wonder if he's staying interested in motorcycles because he loves them, or because he thinks I need him to carry on the family tradition. Vivian considered this while chewing thoughtfully. Can I ask you something personal? Graham nodded. What would you do if money wasn't a factor? If you could run your shop exactly the way you wanted, without worrying about rent or parts costs? Or whether you'd make enough to keep the lights on? The question caught Graham off guard. It had been so long since he'd thought beyond survival that he almost didn't know how to answer. I guess, he said slowly, I'd want to create the kind. A place my wife dreamed about. A space where people could learn, where the art of motorcycle restoration could be passed down, where riders could gather and share stories. She had this vision of making the shop into a community center for motorcycle culture. That sounds incredible, Vivian said, and Graham could hear genuine enthusiasm in her voice. What happened to that vision? Graham's expression darkened slightly. Life happened. Medical bills, economic reality, the practical limitations of running a small business in a small town. Dreams are expensive, and sometimes you have to choose between dreaming and surviving. Vivian nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. But what if you didn't have to choose? What if there was a way to honor both the practical necessities and the larger vision? Before Graham could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and frowned. I'm sorry, but I need to get back to the shop. Mrs. Henderson is having trouble with her Sportster again, and she's my next appointment. As they walked back toward Elm Street, Vivian asked more questions about the local riding community, about the other shops in the area, about the kinds of services that weren't readily available to motorcycle enthusiasts in this part of the state. Graham found her curiosity refreshing. Most customers wanted to know when their bike would be fixed and how much it would cost. But Vivian seemed genuinely interested in understanding the broader ecosystem of motorcycle culture and repair. Back at the shop, Mrs. Henderson was waiting with her 1995 Sportster, looking worried and apologetic. Graham immediately shifted into professional mode, greeting her warmly and assuring her that whatever the problem was, they'd figure it out together. Vivian stepped back to give them space, but Graham noticed that she watched the interaction with careful attention. Mrs. Henderson, this is Vivian Palmer, Graham said, after determining that the Sportster's problem was a loose battery cable, something that would take 5 minutes to fix, but had probably caused the elderly woman an hour of worry. She's a fellow Harley rider whose bike is in for some repair work. The two women struck up an immediate conversation about the challenges of motorcycle maintenance, and Graham was struck by Vivian's ability to put Mrs. Henderson at ease. She asked thoughtful questions about the older woman's riding history, complimented her on keeping the Sportster in such good condition, and shared stories from her own travels that made Mrs. Henderson laugh and nod with recognition. When Mrs. Henderson tried to pay for the battery cable repair, Graham waved her money away as usual. "Just glad we could get you back on the road safely," he said. After Mrs. Henderson left, Vivian turned to Graham with an expression of curiosity mixed with something that might have been approval. "You do that often?" she asked. "Do what?" "Fix. Do things for free." Graham shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Mrs. Henderson's on a fixed income, and that Sportster is her only transportation. It was a 5-minute fix." Vivian nodded slowly, and Graham had the distinct impression that he'd just passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. "That's exactly the kind of thing my grandfather would have done," she said quietly. "He always said that the true measure of a mechanic wasn't how much money they could charge, but how much good they could do." As the afternoon wore on and they returned to working on the shovelhead, Graham found himself looking forward to tomorrow's continuation of the repair work. Not just because he enjoyed the technical challenge of restoring a quality motorcycle, but because he was genuinely curious to learn more about this woman who traveled alone, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed to understand both the practical and philosophical sides of motorcycle culture. There was definitely more to Vivian Palmer's story than she was revealing, but Graham found that he didn't mind the mystery. For the first time in months, he was working alongside someone who shared his appreciation for craftsmanship, who understood the deeper meaning behind the work, and who made him remember why he'd fallen in love with motorcycles in the first place. The second day of Vivian's stay began with an unexpected surprise. Graham arrived at the shop to find her already there, sitting on the front steps with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a bag of pastries from the bakery 3 blocks away. The early morning air carried the crisp promise of autumn, and she'd wrapped herself in a wool sweater that made her look less like a road warrior and more like someone who belonged in Millbrook Valley's quiet rhythms. "I hope you don't mind," she said, offering him one of the cups. "I'm an early riser and I figured you might be too. Thought I'd return the favor for yesterday's lunch." Graham accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that she'd somehow managed to get it exactly the way he liked it. Black, strong, but not bitter. "How did you know I'd be here this early?" "Lucky guess," Vivian replied with a smile. "Plus, I saw the lights on in your apartment upstairs around 5:30. Either you're an insomniac, or you're the type who can't stay away from unfinished projects." The observation was accurate enough to make Graham slightly uncomfortable. He had been awake since 5, thinking about the shovelhead's engine problems and sketching possible solutions in the margins of an old repair manual. "Guilty as charged," he admitted. "Some problems don't wait for business hours." They settled into the comfortable routine they'd established the day before, but with a familiarity that suggested they'd been working together for years rather than days. Vivian seemed to anticipate his needs, handing him tools before he asked, and offering insights about the bike's quirks that proved invaluable as Graham disassembled the upper end of the engine. "The compression release has always been a little sticky," she mentioned, as Graham examined the valve train. "My grandfather used to say it gave the bike character, but I think he was just too stubborn to have it adjusted properly." "Characters can be expensive," Graham replied, finding exactly the problem she'd described. "But in this case, it's probably what saved the valves when the engine started running rough. A little stickiness might have prevented a lot of damage." As the morning progressed, Julian joined them, and Graham was struck by how naturally the 3 of them fell into a collaborative rhythm. Vivian treated Julian as an equal participant rather than a teenager who was merely observing, asking for his opinions on technical matters, and listening thoughtfully to his responses. When Julian suggested a different approach to removing a particularly stubborn bolt, Vivian nodded seriously and said, "That's exactly how my grandfather would have handled it. Great minds think alike." The praise made Julian glow with pride, and Graham felt an unexpected surge of gratitude toward this woman who seemed to understand intuitively how to encourage a young person's confidence without patronizing them. Around mid-morning, Vivian excused herself to make some phone calls, mentioning something about checking in with the Home Office. Graham noted the phrase but didn't comment, focusing instead on the delicate work of inspecting the shovelhead's pistons and cylinder walls. When she returned 30 minutes later, she seemed slightly distracted, but quickly refocused on the mechanical work at hand. "Everything all right?" Graham asked, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders. "Just business stuff," Vivian replied with a dismissive wave. "Nothing that can't wait until this beautiful machine is running properly again." The lunch break brought another revelation about Vivian's character. Instead of suggesting they go out again, she produced a cooler from her motorcycle's storage compartment and unpacked an impressive picnic lunch, sandwiches made with fresh bread, local cheese, and what appeared to be homemade preserves, along with crisp apples and bottles of craft beer from a brewery Graham recognized as being located about 200 miles away. "I may be a nomad," she explained as they settled at a small table in the shop's side yard, "but I believe in eating well. Life's too short for gas station sandwiches and chain restaurant coffee." Julian joined them for lunch, and the conversation turned to his future plans. Vivian asked thoughtful questions about his interests, his college ambitions, and his thoughts about following in his father's footsteps. Graham was impressed by her ability to draw Julian out without making him feel pressured or judged. "What draws you to motorcycle work?" she asked Julian. "Is it the mechanical challenge, the artistic aspect, or something else?" Julian considered the question seriously, twirling an apple slice on his fork. "I think it's the stories," he said finally. "Every bike that comes in here has a history, and Dad knows how to read that history in the wear patterns and the modifications and the way people talk about their machines. It's like being a detective, but instead of solving crimes, you're solving the mystery of how to keep someone's dreams running." Vivian's face lit up with genuine delight. "That's a beautiful way to put it," she said. "Your grandfather would have loved that perspective. He used to say that motorcycles were just steel and chrome until someone's dreams climbed on and brought them to life." After lunch, as they returned to work on the shovelhead, Vivian began sharing more detailed stories about her family's relationship with motorcycles. Her great-grandfather had apparently been involved in some of the early technical innovations that shaped American motorcycle design. Her grandfather had been a passionate rider who traveled extensively throughout the country, documenting motorcycle culture and the communities that grew up around it. He kept journals of every trip, she explained, while cleaning parts in the solvent tank. Not just mechanical notes, but observations about the people he met, the shops he visited, the way motorcycle culture varied from region to region. He was fascinated by the idea that motorcycles could create communities that transcended geography and economics. Graham found himself sharing stories from his own family's history in return. His grandfather's work on military motorcycles during World War II, his father's transition from automotive to motorcycle repair, his own journey from teenage apprentice to shop owner. The exchange felt natural, like old friends catching up rather than new acquaintances getting to know each other. As the afternoon wore on, Vivian's questions became more specific and more intriguing. She asked about parts suppliers, about the challenges of finding skilled apprentices, about the relationship between independent shops and the major motorcycle manufacturers. Her questions demonstrated a level of industry knowledge that went well beyond what a typical rider would possess, even an experienced one. You seem to know a lot about the business side of motorcycle repair, Graham observed as they worked on reassembling the shovelhead's valve train. Is that from your grandfather's influence, or do you have professional experience in the industry? Vivian paused in her work, considering her answer carefully. A little of both, she said finally. My family has always been deeply involved in motorcycle culture, and that includes understanding how the business side works. You can't really appreciate the craft without understanding the economics that support it. The answer was truthful but vague, and Graham sensed that there were layers of meaning he wasn't quite grasping. But rather than pressing for more specific information, he found himself content to let the mystery unfold naturally. Vivian had earned his trust through her actions, her respect for his work, and her genuine care for both him and Julian. Whatever secrets she might be keeping, Graham was confident they came from a place of caution rather than deception. That evening, after Julian had gone upstairs to do homework, Graham and Vivian sat in the shop's small office, sharing a beer and reviewing the progress they'd made on the shovelhead. The engine work was proceeding smoothly, but Graham estimated it would take at least 3 more days to complete all the necessary repairs and adjustments. I hope you're not getting restless, he said. I know this isn't how you plan to spend your trip to the coast. Vivian looked around the office, her gaze taking in the family photos, the accumulated tools and manuals, the comfortable disorder of a workspace that had evolved organically over decades. Actually, she said softly, this is exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know it when I got here. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never planned to visit. Graham felt something warm and unfamiliar flutter in his chest. A sensation he recognized as attraction, but deeper than that, interest, hope, the possibility that loneliness might not be a permanent condition after all. I'm glad you're stuck here with us, he said quietly. Vivian met his eyes across the small table, and for a moment, the careful distance she maintained seemed to dissolve entirely. So am I, she replied. So am I. The third day brought a subtle shift in the dynamics of the shop. Graham noticed it first in the way Vivian handled her phone calls, stepping further away, speaking in lower tones, occasionally glancing back at him with an expression that seemed almost apologetic. When she returned from one particularly long conversation that took her completely outside and around the corner of the building, Graham couldn't help but ask if everything was all right. Just some family business that needs attention, she said, but her smile seemed forced. Nothing urgent, but you know how family can be when they want updates on your travel plans. Graham nodded, though something about her explanation didn't quite ring true. In the 3 days he'd known Vivian, she'd mentioned her grandfather extensively, but had said almost nothing about current family members who might be tracking her movements or expecting regular check-ins. The discrepancy was small, but it nagged at him. The morning's work on the shovelhead proceeded smoothly, but Graham found himself paying closer attention to Vivian's comments and questions. When she asked about his parts suppliers, her inquiries were surprisingly specific, not just about availability and pricing, but about distribution networks, regional variations in service quality, and the relationships between independent suppliers and major manufacturers. You seem to know a lot about supply chain logistics, Graham observed as they waited for a specialty gasket to soak in penetrating oil. That's not usually something recreational riders think about. Vivian paused, her hands stilling on the cleaning rag she'd been using. My grandfather was involved in parts distribution for a while, she said carefully. He taught me that understanding the whole ecosystem is important if you want to really appreciate any part of it. It was a reasonable explanation, but Graham noticed that Vivian's family history seemed to have tentacles reaching into every aspect of the motorcycle industry. Manufacturing, distribution, repair, culture. Either her grandfather had been remarkably diverse in his interests, or there were connections she wasn't fully explaining. Julian's presence added another layer of complexity to Graham's observations. The teenager had clearly developed a case of hero worship for Vivian, hanging on her stories about cross-country travel and asking detailed questions about motorcycle maintenance techniques. But Graham noticed that when Julian asked about Vivian's work or her home base, her answers became noticeably vague. "What do you do when you're not traveling?" Julian asked during their lunch break, with the straightforward curiosity that teenagers brought to personal questions. "I work in the family business," Vivian replied, then quickly redirected the conversation. "But enough about me. Tell me more about this custom bike project you and your dad are working on." Graham filed away another small inconsistency. Yesterday, Vivian had described herself as something of a nomad. Today, she was claiming involvement in a family business that presumably required her presence in a specific location. The contradiction was subtle, but it suggested that her carefully constructed persona might be more complex than it appeared. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor that added to Graham's growing sense that there was more to Vivian's story than she was revealing. Around 2 o'clock, a black luxury sedan pulled into the shop's small parking area, looking as out of place on Elm Street as a yacht in a farm pond. The driver was a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed, carrying herself with the kind of authoritative bearing that suggested she was accustomed to being taken seriously. She entered the shop and immediately scanned the space until her eyes found Vivian, who had gone noticeably pale upon seeing the sedan arrive. "Ms. Palmer," the woman said with crisp efficiency, "I need to speak with you about the Henderson situation. It's becoming quite urgent." Vivian's composure cracked for just a moment, long enough for Graham to see something that looked like panic flash across her features before she regained control. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Let me just step outside for a moment." The two women walked to the sedan, where they had what appeared to be an intense conversation. Graham couldn't hear the words, but he could see the body language, the visitors' gestures, suggesting urgency and frustration, Vivian's responses indicating resistance and negotiation. At one point, the visitor handed Vivian a manila folder, which she reviewed quickly before handing it back with what appeared to be decisive headshake. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, after which the visitor returned to her car and drove away without acknowledging Graham or Julian's presence. Vivian stood beside the parking area for a few moments, her shoulders tense, before returning to the shop with a smile that was clearly forced. "Sorry about that," she said, as if nothing unusual had happened, just some business that needed to be handled remotely. Julian, with the bluntness of youth, asked the question Graham was thinking. "Who was that? She looked like she was from the government or something." Vivian laughed, but the sound was brittle. "Nothing so dramatic, just a family attorney dealing with some estate issues. Very boring stuff, I promise." Graham nodded politely, but his mind was racing. Vivian had mentioned earlier that her grandfather had passed away, but estate issues typically required the presence of beneficiaries, not traveling consultation with mysterious visitors in luxury cars. And the urgency of the visitor's manner suggested something more immediate than the usual bureaucratic pace of estate settlements. As the afternoon progressed, Graham found himself noticing other small details that didn't quite fit Vivian's presentation of herself as a solo traveler on a casual cross-country journey. Her riding gear, while well used, was clearly expensive, the kind of specialized equipment that cost thousands of dollars and was typically owned by serious riders with substantial disposable income. Her leather jacket bore no patches or pins, which was unusual for someone who claimed to have been riding for decades and participating in motorcycle culture. More significantly, her mechanical knowledge went beyond what even experienced riders typically possessed. When she offhandedly mentioned a specific technical service bulletin that had been issued for shovelhead engines in the early 1980s, Graham realized that she had access to information that was generally available only to professional mechanics or people with industry connections. "How did you know about that service bulletin?" he asked casually. Vivian's pause was almost imperceptible, but Graham caught it. "My grandfather kept meticulous records," she said. "He saved everything: service manuals, technical updates, correspondence with dealers. I spent a lot of time going through his papers after he passed. It was plausible, but it was also the kind of explanation that was difficult to verify and broad enough to cover almost any level of specialized knowledge." Graham was beginning to suspect that Vivian Palmer's relationship with the motorcycle industry was far more extensive and current than she was admitting. That evening, after Julian had gone upstairs and they were alone in the shop, Graham found himself studying Vivian more carefully as they worked on the final stages of the shovelhead's engine reassembly. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had performed these operations many times before, and her familiarity with Harley-Davidson's specific engineering quirks suggested experience that went well beyond recreational riding. "Can I ask you something personal?" Graham said as they torqued the head bolts to specification. "Of course," Vivian replied, though her tone suggested some wariness. "You know a lot more about motorcycles than most riders, even experienced ones. And that woman who came by today seemed pretty insistent about whatever business you're avoiding. I'm not trying to pry, but I'm curious about what brought you to my shop specifically." Vivian set down her torque wrench and looked at him directly. For a moment, Graham thought she might tell him the truth, whatever that truth might be. But then her expression shifted back to the careful neutrality she'd maintained since arriving. "I told you," she said quietly. "My grandfather's bike broke down, and I needed help from someone who could fix it properly. Everything else is just complicated family stuff that has nothing to do with you or your shop." Graham nodded, accepting the deflection even though it didn't answer his real question. But as they continued working in the comfortable silence that had become their norm, he couldn't shake the feeling that Vivian Palmer was running from something, or toward something, that was far more significant than a simple cross-country motorcycle trip. And despite his growing attraction to her, despite the way she'd brought energy and purpose back into his daily routine, Graham found himself wondering whether her eventual departure would bring relief or regret. Because one thing was becoming increasingly clear: whatever Vivian Palmer's real story was, it was going to have an ending that he wasn't prepared for. The revelation came not with dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet inevitability of a storm that had been building on the horizon for days. Graham arrived at the shop on Thursday morning to find Vivian already there, but instead of her usual position beside the shovelhead with tools in hand, she was sitting on the old wooden bench near the office, staring at her phone with an expression of resignation mixed with something that might have been relief. "We need to talk," she said without looking up. "Before Julian gets here, before we finish the bike, before this goes any further." Graham felt his stomach tighten with anticipation and dread. He'd been expecting this moment since the mysterious visitor's appearance yesterday, but that didn't make it any easier to face. "All right," he said, setting down his coffee and taking a seat on the bench beside her. "I'm listening." Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her fingers turning the phone over and over in her hands like a worry stone. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had been carrying secrets for too long. "My name really is Vivian Palmer," she began, "but that's about the only thing I've told you that's completely true. Well, that and the fact that this shovelhead belonged to my grandfather and that he taught me to ride when I was 12. Graham waited, sensing that interrupting would only make this harder for both of them. "My grandfather was William Palmer," Vivian continued, and Graham felt a shock of recognition at the name. William Palmer had been one of the founding members of the modern Harley-Davidson executive team, instrumental in the company's revival during the 1980s and one of the most respected figures in American motorcycle history. He died 6 months ago, and when he did, I inherited something I never expected and didn't particularly want. She turned to face Graham directly, her eyes showing a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. I inherited controlling interest in Harley-Davidson Motor Company. As of 3 months ago, I'm the majority stakeholder, and as of last week, when I finally stopped running from the responsibility, the interim CEO. The words hit Graham like cold water. Suddenly, every inconsistency, every evasive answer, every moment of specialized knowledge fell into place. The expensive equipment, the technical expertise, the mysterious phone calls, the urgent visitor, it all made perfect sense in a way that left him feeling simultaneously enlightened and betrayed. The woman who came by yesterday, he said slowly, was from Harley-Davidson. My executive assistant, Vivian confirmed. Along with about half the board of directors, she's been trying to track me down for 2 weeks. I was supposed to be in Milwaukee for a series of crucial meetings about the company's direction, but instead, I've been riding my grandfather's bike across the country, trying to figure out how to handle a responsibility I never wanted. Graham stood up abruptly, needing space to process what he was hearing. So this whole thing, the breakdown, staying here, working on the bike together, was that just an elaborate way to avoid your responsibilities? No, Vivian said firmly, standing as well. The breakdown was real, Graham. Everything that's happened between us has been real. The only thing that wasn't real was my story about being a solo traveler on a casual cross-country trip. Then what was it really? Vivian walked over to the shovelhead, placing her hand on the fuel tank with the same affectionate gesture Graham had seen her use dozens of times over the past 4 days. It was an escape, she said quietly, from boardrooms and expectations, and the weight of carrying on a legacy I'm not sure I'm qualified to handle. My grandfather spent 60 years building something meaningful in the motorcycle industry, and suddenly it's all my responsibility. She turned back to Graham, her expression raw with uncertainty. Do you know what it's like to inherit something that everyone expects you to understand instinctively just because it's in your blood? I know motorcycles, I love riding, I understand the culture, but running a multinational corporation, making decisions that affect thousands of employees and millions of riders, I have no idea what I'm doing. Graham felt his anger beginning to dissolve, replaced by something more complex. So you decided to take a road trip instead of facing it? I decided to try to understand what my grandfather really built, Vivian replied. Not the corporate structure, or the market share, or the quarterly reports, but the actual impact on real people. I wanted to see the industry from the ground up, to visit the independent shops and the riders and the communities that make motorcycles matter beyond just being consumer products. The shop fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Graham found himself looking at Vivian with completely new eyes, seeing not the mysterious traveler who had captivated him, but a woman struggling with responsibilities that would overwhelm anyone. And what did you find? He asked finally. Vivian's smile was small but genuine. I found places like this, she said, gesturing around the shop. I found people like you and Julian, who understand that motorcycles aren't just machines, they're connections to freedom, to community, to a way of life that's worth preserving. I found the heart of what my grandfather was trying to protect. Julian's voice from the doorway interrupted the moment. Found what? He asked, clearly sensing the tension in the room, but not understanding its source. Graham and Vivian exchanged glances, and Graham could see the question in her eyes. How much should Julian know? Graham made the decision for both of them. Julian, come sit down, he said gently. Vivian has something to tell us about who she really is. As Vivian explained her identity and position to Julian, Graham watched his son's reaction shift from confusion to amazement, to something that looked like Betrayal. When she finished, Julian was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "So you're like the boss of Harley-Davidson?" he asked. "Something like that," Vivian replied. "And you've been lying to us this whole time." "Not lying," Vivian said carefully. "Just not telling the whole truth. Everything I've shared about loving motorcycles, about believing in the importance of places like your father's shop, about respecting the work you both do, all of that has been completely honest." Julian looked between his father and Vivian, processing the implications. "Why are you telling us now?" Vivian pulled out her phone and showed them the screen, which displayed dozens of missed calls and text messages. "Because I can't run forever," she said. "The company needs decisions made, and there are people whose jobs depend on those decisions. And because," she looked directly at Graham, "I care about both of you too much to keep pretending to be someone." "I'm not." Graham felt the weight of the revelation settling around him, like dust after an explosion. The woman he'd been falling for was not just wealthy, she was one of the most powerful people in the motorcycle industry. The casual conversations they'd shared about the challenges of running an independent shop had been between a struggling small business owner and someone who could influence the entire economic ecosystem he operated within. "I need some air," he said abruptly, heading for the door. "Graham, please," Vivian called after him. "Just give me a few minutes," he replied without turning around. "I need to think about this." Outside, the October morning was crisp and clear, but Graham felt like he was seeing Millbrook Valley through different eyes. The quiet street, the modest businesses, the entire world he'd built with Sarah, it all suddenly seemed smaller and more fragile than it had an hour ago. He'd been attracted to Vivian Palmer, the mysterious traveler. He had no idea how to feel about Vivian Palmer, the motorcycle industry executive, who could probably buy and sell his entire neighborhood without affecting her quarterly budget. But as he stood there trying to process the magnitude of the deception, one thing became clear. Whatever happened next, his life had just become infinitely more complicated. Graham walked for nearly an hour through Millbrook Valley's quiet streets, his mind churning through the implications of Vivian's revelation. Every familiar landmark, the corner store where he bought his morning coffee, the diner where they'd shared lunch just 2 days ago, the elementary school where Julian had played on the playground as a boy, seemed to mock him with their ordinariness. How had he been so blind to the signs? How had he convinced himself that someone with Vivian's knowledge, resources, and obvious sophistication was just another traveler who happened to find his shop? The answer, he realized with uncomfortable clarity, was that he'd wanted to believe it. For the first time since Sarah's death, he'd felt genuinely connected to someone, professionally respected, personally valued. Vivian had made him remember what it felt like to be seen as more than just a struggling small business owner trying to keep his head above water. She treated his expertise as valuable, his shop as worthy of admiration, his dreams as achievable rather than naive. Now he had to confront the possibility that it had all been an elaborate form of charity, a wealthy executive playing dress-up among the working class, collecting authentic experiences to salve her conscience about inherited privilege. When he returned to the shop, he found Julian alone, methodically organizing tools with the kind of focused intensity he usually reserved for avoiding difficult conversations. The shovel head sat partially assembled, looking oddly abandoned without Vivian's presence. "Where is she?" Graham asked. "Gone," Julian replied without looking up from the socket set he was arranging by size. "Said she had some phone calls to make and would give us space to talk." Graham sat down heavily on the bench where Vivian had delivered her confession. "What do you think about all this?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, continuing his meticulous tool organization. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a maturity that sometimes surprised Graham. "I think she's scared," he said, "and I think she really does care about us. But I also think she's been lying to herself as much as she's been lying to us." "What do you mean?" Julian set down the socket wrench he'd been holding and turned to face his father. "She kept talking about wanting to understand the industry from the ground up, right? But she's been asking you questions like she was studying you, not like she was learning from you. And all that stuff about her grandfather's journals and records, I think she's been trying to prove to herself that she belongs in his world instead of the corporate world she inherited." Graham stared at his son, struck by the insight. "You think she was using us?" "I think she was using the situation," Julian corrected. "But I don't think she was using us. There's a difference." Before Graham could respond, the bell on the shop doctor chimed, and Mrs. Henderson entered with her usual apologetic smile and worried expression. "I'm so sorry to bother you, Graham, but the Sportster is making that funny noise again, and I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon." Graham forced himself to shift into professional mode, greeting Mrs. Henderson warmly and assuring her that they'd figure out whatever was wrong. As he worked on the simple carburetor adjustment that solved her problem, he found himself thinking about Vivian's observation from yesterday, how Mrs. Henderson represented exactly the kind of customer relationship that corporate executives never really understood. Mrs. Henderson couldn't afford dealer prices, didn't want to buy a new bike, and needed someone who would treat her machine with respect rather than trying to upsell her into expensive solutions. Graham's willingness to work for reduced payment wasn't just charity. It was an investment in the community, a recognition that keeping people mobile and independent was worth more than maximizing profit on every transaction. As Mrs. Henderson thanked him and left, Graham realized that his relationship with customers like her was exactly what Vivian claimed to be trying to understand. But understanding it from the outside was different from living it, and living it was different from having the power to protect or destroy it. The afternoon brought a succession of familiar challenges that helped ground Graham in his routine. A teenager with a dirt bike that wouldn't start, bad spark plug, and adolescent impatience. A retired teacher whose vintage Honda needed new brake pads, and someone willing to listen to stories about cross-country motorcycle trips from the 1970s. A young father whose commuter bike had developed a concerning vibration that turned out to be a loose exhaust mount and 5 minutes of preventive maintenance. Each interaction reminded Graham of why he'd stayed in Millbrook Valley, why he'd chosen to preserve his father's legacy rather than pursue more lucrative opportunities elsewhere. These weren't just transactions. They were relationships built on trust and mutual respect, sustained by the understanding that quality work and fair dealing still mattered in a world increasingly dominated by corporate efficiency. But they were also reminders of how precarious his position really was. Every free repair for Mrs. Henderson, every discounted service for struggling customers, every decision to prioritize relationships over profit brought him closer to the financial edge. Vivian's presence had made him temporarily forget how little margin for error he actually had. Julian joined him for the afternoon's work, and Graham was grateful for his son's steady presence and practical perspective. As they worked together on the routine maintenance tasks, Julian asked the question that had been lurking in Graham's mind all day. "Do you think she's coming back?" Graham paused in his work, considering the question seriously. "I don't know," he said finally. "She's got responsibilities in Milwaukee, board meetings to attend, a company to run. This was just a detour for her, not a destination." "But what if it wasn't?" Julian pressed. "What if she decides she wants to be here instead of there?" The question hit Graham harder than he'd expected. In the space of 4 days, Vivian had become integrated into his daily routine, his professional life, his personal thoughts about the future. The idea of her permanent presence was both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because of the connection they developed terrifying because of the massive disparity in their circumstances. "I don't think that's realistic," Graham said carefully. "People don't walk away from that kind of responsibility, that kind of power. And even if they did, what would someone like her want with a place like this on a permanent basis?" Julian was quiet for a moment, then said something that stopped Graham's hands entirely. "Maybe the same thing someone like you wants with a place like this. Maybe she's figured out that fixing things that matter is better than managing things that don't." That evening, after Julian had gone upstairs to do homework, Graham sat alone in the shop office, staring at the partially assembled shovelhead and trying to imagine completing the work without Vivian's presence. The engine rebuilding had become a collaborative project, with both of them contributing expertise and insight. Finishing it alone would feel like trying to complete a conversation with half the participants missing. More troubling was the realization that he'd begun to envision a future that included her, not just as a romantic partner, but as someone who understood the deeper meaning of the work, who could help him realize Sarah's vision of expanding the shop's community role. Vivian's questions about funding and business models hadn't been casual curiosity. They'd been the inquiries of someone thinking about practical implementation. Now he had to confront the possibility that those conversations had been academic exercises rather than genuine planning sessions. Vivian Palmer could fund community workshops and apprenticeship programs without affecting her personal budget, but that didn't mean she had any intention of doing so. Understanding a problem wasn't the same as committing to solve it. As Graham locked up the shop and climbed the stairs to his apartment, he felt the familiar weight of uncertainty that had defined his life since Sarah's death. But this time, the uncertainty was different. Instead of wondering whether he could survive the next financial challenge or keep the shop running for another year, he was wondering whether he'd been given a glimpse of a different kind of future, one that might be possible, but only if he was willing to trust someone whose world was so different from his own that they might as well have been speaking different languages. The question that kept him awake that night wasn't whether Vivian Palmer would return to finish the conversation. They'd started. The question was whether Graham Parker was brave enough to have that conversation honestly, knowing that the stakes had just become higher than he'd ever imagined possible. Vivian returned the next morning with the rising sun, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested she'd spent as much of the night awake as Graham had. She found him already in the shop, methodically working on the shovelhead's final assembly, his movements precise but somehow mechanical, lacking the collaborative energy that had characterized their previous days together. "I know you're angry," she said without preamble, setting one of the coffee cups within his reach. "And you have every right to be. But before you decide what this means for us, for any of us, I need you to understand something about why I came here." Graham continued, working, not trusting himself to speak yet. The familiar weight of the wrench in his hands provided an anchor point, while his emotions churned between attraction, anger, and a dozen other feelings he couldn't quite name. 6 months ago, Vivian began, settling onto the work stool she'd claimed as her own. "I was an art history professor at Northwestern University. I had tenure, a comfortable life, zero interest in corporate boardrooms, and exactly enough motorcycle knowledge to keep my grandfather's bike running for weekend rides along Lake Michigan." Graham's hands stilled on the wrench. This wasn't the explanation he'd been expecting. "When my grandfather died and left me his shares in Harley-Davidson, everyone assumed I'd sell them immediately. Liquidate the inheritance, take the money, go back to my quiet academic life." Vivian's voice carried a mixture of grief and frustration, but the will came with a letter asking me to spend 1 year trying to understand what he'd built before. "I made that decision She pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket, worn soft from handling. He wrote that the company wasn't just about manufacturing motorcycles. It was about preserving a way of life, supporting communities of craftsmen and riders who kept the culture alive. He asked me to see the industry through the eyes of people, like you, before I decided whether to be part of protecting it or cashing out and walking away. Graham finally looked up from the engine. So this really was research. It started that way, Vivian admitted. I planned to visit a dozen shops in different regions, spend a few days at each one, document the challenges independent mechanics face, write a report for the board, and sell my shares with a clear conscience. But Vivian was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the Harley's fuel tank. But I hadn't accounted for what it would feel like to work alongside someone who does this because he loves it, not because it's profitable. I hadn't expected to meet a teenager who sees motorcycle repair as storytelling, or to watch you fix Mrs. Henderson's bike for free because keeping her mobile matters more than your bottom line. Julian appeared in the doorway, clearly having been listening from the office. So what changed? He asked with characteristic directness. Everything, Vivian replied, looking between Graham and Julian. I came here planning to spend 3 days taking notes and moved on. Instead, I found the kind of community my grandfather wrote about. People who understand that preserving something beautiful is more important than maximizing efficiency. Graham set down his tools and faced her fully. But you're still going. Back to Milwaukee. You're still going to run the company. Yes, Vivian said simply, because after spending time here, I finally understand what my grandfather was trying to preserve. And I realize that protecting places like this shop, supporting people like both of you, isn't something I can do from the outside. She stood up and walked to the window overlooking Elm Street, her gaze taking in the quiet neighborhood that had become familiar over the past 5 days. Do you know what the board of directors wants to do? Streamline the dealer network, eliminate support for independent shops, focus exclusively on premium retail experiences in upscale markets. They think people like Mrs. Henderson are irrelevant to the brand's future. Graham felt something cold settle in his stomach. And you disagree? I think they're about to destroy the foundation that everything else is built on, Vivian replied, turning back to face him. Corporate efficiency looks good on quarterly reports, but it doesn't create the kind of lifelong loyalty that keeps brands alive for a century. Julian had been listening intently, his expression serious beyond his years. So what are you going to do about it? Vivian smiled, and for the first time since her revelation yesterday, Graham saw genuine warmth in her expression. I'm going to fight for every independent shop, every small-town mechanic, every rider who values community over convenience. I'm going to use my grandfather's money and influence to make sure places like this shop don't just survive, they thrive. That sounds like a campaign speech, Graham said, though his tone was more curious than accusatory. Maybe it is, Vivian admitted. But it's also a promise, and it's an invitation. Graham raised an eyebrow. What kind of invitation? Vivian pulled out a manila folder Graham hadn't noticed her carrying. A formal proposal for the Millbrook Valley Community Motorcycle Center. Funding for facility expansion, equipment upgrades, apprenticeship programs, and educational workshops. Everything your wife dreamed about, but with the resources to make it actually happen. Graham stared at the folder as if it might explode. You're offering to fund Sarah's vision. I'm offering to partner with you to realize it, Vivian corrected. Your expertise, your community relationships, your understanding of what riders actually need. My resources, my industry connections, my ability to protect this place from corporate consolidation. Julian stepped forward, his eyes bright with excitement. Dad, do you know what this could mean? We could teach kids from all over the county. We could preserve the old techniques while teaching new ones. We could be completely in over our heads," Graham interrupted, though. His voice lacked conviction. "Vivian, this is generous, but partnerships between people from different worlds don't always work out the way they're supposed to on paper." Vivian nodded seriously. "You're absolutely right. There would be challenges, complications, probably some spectacular disagreements about priorities and methods, corporate oversight, regulatory requirements, the constant pressure to prove that community value can coexist with business sustainability." She paused, studying Graham's face carefully. "But there would also be something neither of us could create alone. You have the trust and respect of the riding community. I have the resources and influence to protect that community from forces that want to eliminate it. Together, we might be able to build something that lasts." Graham found himself thinking about Sarah's business card tucked away in his desk drawer, with her note about being ready to be bigger than their fears. He thought about the declining neighborhood around them, the constant financial pressure, the question of whether Julian would have any meaningful opportunities if he stayed in Millbrook Valley. "This isn't just about business, is it?" he asked, quietly. Vivian met his eyes directly. "No," she said, "it's not. These 5 days have been the first time in my adult life that I've felt like I was doing work that mattered, building something rather than just managing it. And it's been the first time since my grandfather died that I felt like I understood what he was trying to tell me about responsibility and community." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to something more personal. "And it's been the first time since my divorce 3 years ago that I've met someone who makes me want to be brave enough to try building a life instead of just protecting one." Graham felt the last of his anger dissolving, replaced by something more complex and more hopeful. What happens if this doesn't work? If we try to bridge our different worlds and it all falls apart? Vivian smiled, reaching for the wrench he'd set aside. "Then at least we'll fail while trying to build something beautiful," she said, "and we'll have one perfectly restored 1978 shovelhead to show for the effort." Julian laughed, the sound breaking, the tension that had filled the shop for the past day. "I think that's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said in this garage." Graham looked at his son, then at Vivian, then at the proposal folder that represented possibilities he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. For the first time since Sarah's death, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than simply endure. "All right," he said finally, picking up his tools with renewed purpose. "Let's finish this bike, and then let's talk about building something bigger." 3 weeks later, Parker's cycle repair looked like a construction zone wrapped around a functioning motorcycle shop. The adjacent lot that had been empty for 5 years now bustled with contractors, architects, and delivery trucks, bringing materials for what would become the Millbrook Valley Community Motorcycle Center. Graham stood in the doorway of his original shop, coffee in hand, watching Julian explain carburetor theory to a group of teenagers from the local high school who'd volunteered to help with the renovation. The transformation had begun faster than Graham could have imagined. Within days of Vivian's proposal, lawyers and contractors had descended on Millbrook Valley like a well-organized army of progress. Property purchases, permit applications, zoning variance requests, all the bureaucratic machinery that had seemed impossibly complex when Sarah had dreamed about expansion suddenly moved with corporate efficiency. But what impressed Graham most was how Vivian had insisted on preserving the heart of what already existed. The original shop would remain exactly as it was, complete with the hand-painted sign and the transistor radio that Julian had repaired. The expansion would wrap around it like a protective embrace, adding classroom space, workshop bays, and a small museum dedicated to motorcycle history, without erasing the authentic character that made the place special. Still having trouble believing it's real? Vivian asked, joining Graham in the doorway. She'd been commuting between Millbrook Valley and Milwaukee for the past 2 weeks, managing Harley-Davidson business during the day and renovation planning in the evenings. The dual life was exhausting, but she'd thrown herself into both roles, with an energy that suggested she'd finally found work that felt like purpose rather than obligation. Every morning I wake up expecting to find out it was all an elaborate dream, Graham admitted. Yesterday I had a conference call with the Dean of the State University's engineering program about setting up an internship exchange. 6 months ago I was worried about making rent. Vivian smiled, watching Julian demonstrate proper talk technique to a 17-year-old girl who'd expressed interest in learning motorcycle maintenance. "Your son is going to be an incredible teacher," she observed. "He has that rare gift of making complex things seem accessible without dumbing them down." Graham nodded proudly. Julian had embraced the expansion project with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession, spending hours researching motorcycle history, planning curriculum for different skill levels, and designing workshop spaces that would accommodate both vintage restoration and modern diagnostic techniques. The teenager who'd been considering dropping out of school to work construction was now talking about dual enrollment in community college courses that would prepare him to eventually take over management of the educational programs. The board meeting went well? Graham asked, noting the satisfied expression Vivian wore when she returned from Milwaukee. "Better than well," she replied. "We approved funding for similar community partnerships in 12 other locations across the country. Your shop isn't just getting support, it's becoming the model for how Harley-Davidson engages with independent mechanics and local riding communities." Graham felt a familiar flutter of anxiety about the expanded scope of responsibility. "No. The pressure, right?" Vivian laughed, bumping his shoulder with hers. "The pressure is what makes it interesting. Besides, you're not doing this alone anymore." The partnership had evolved into something more complex and more satisfying than either of them had initially envisioned. Graham's expertise in motorcycle repair and customer relationships balanced Vivian's understanding of business development and industry dynamics. Her corporate connections opened doors that would have remained permanently closed to a small-town mechanic, while his reputation for quality work and community service provided credibility that no amount of corporate money could purchase. More personally, their relationship had deepened into something that felt both natural and slightly miraculous. Vivian had rented a small house 2 blocks from the shop, close enough to be present for daily operations, but far enough to maintain some independence. They worked together during the day, shared dinner most evenings, and spent late nights planning the future of motorcycle education in rural communities. "There's something I want to show you," Vivian said, pulling a letter from her jacket pocket. "This came to my office in Milwaukee yesterday." Graham unfolded the handwritten note, immediately recognizing Mrs. Henderson's careful script. "Dear Miss Palmer, I heard about what you're doing with Graham's shop, and I wanted you to know that my late husband would have been proud to see young people learning proper motorcycle maintenance. He always said that keeping good bikes running was a way of keeping good memories alive. I've enclosed a check for the scholarship fund. It's not much, but it comes with my prayer that this place helps more people understand that working with your hands is a form of worship. Gratefully yours, Margaret Henderson P.S. My Sportster hasn't given me a lick of trouble since Graham's magic touch. Tell him thank you again." Graham looked at the check attached to the letter and blinked in surprise. It was for $500, a substantial sum for someone living on Social Security. "She's not the only one," Vivian said softly. "We've received over 40 letters like this in the past 2 weeks, along with donations totaling nearly $8,000. Word is spreading about what we're building here, and people want to be part of it." Graham felt emotion tighten his throat. Sarah would have loved this, he said quietly. I think she would have loved seeing Julian step into a leadership role too, Vivian replied, watching as Julian patiently guided a struggling student through the process of adjusting valve clearances. He's got her vision and your technical skills. This place is going to be in good hands for the next generation. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, prospective students, local business owners curious about the expansion, and reporters from motorcycle magazines who'd heard about the innovative partnership between corporate resources and grassroots expertise. Graham found himself giving impromptu interviews about the importance of preserving traditional repair skills while embracing modern diagnostic technology. The goal isn't to turn back the clock, he explained to a writer from Motorcycle Cruiser magazine. It's to make sure that the knowledge and craftsmanship that built this industry doesn't get lost in the rush toward computerization and throwaway consumerism. Later that evening, after the visitors had departed and the construction crews had finished for the day, Graham and Vivian sat in the quiet original shop, surrounded by the familiar smells of oil and metal and the comfortable clutter of tools that had been accumulating stories for 3 generations. Do you ever miss the simplicity of how things were before? Graham asked, gesturing toward the controlled chaos of the expansion project visible through the windows. Vivian considered the question seriously. I miss the illusion that I could control everything by keeping it small, she said finally. But I don't miss the limitation of thinking that small was all I was capable of. She reached across the workbench and took his hand, her fingers still showing traces of grease from the day's work. What about you? Any regrets about letting a corporate executive turn your quiet life upside down? Graham laughed, thinking about the conversation he'd had with Julian that morning about college applications, career goals, and the possibility of someday expanding the community center model to other states. I regret that it took me so long to be brave enough to say yes, he admitted. Sarah always said I was too cautious for my own good. Sarah sounds like she was a smart woman. She was, and I think she would have liked you. Graham paused, studying Vivian's face in the soft light of the desk lamp. I think she would have appreciated that you see possibilities instead of just problems. Vivian smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features into something luminous. I think I would have liked her too. Anyone who could envision all this. She gestured around the shop while dealing with everything else she was facing. That takes a special kind of courage. Outside, the October evening had brought the first real cold of the season. But inside, the shop, surrounded by the tools and dreams that connected past to future, Graham felt warmer than he had in years. Change was coming, had already arrived, but instead of the anxiety that had characterized most transitions in his adult life, he felt something he'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope for a future that honored the past, while embracing possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. 6 months later, the first graduation ceremony of the Millbrook Valley Community Motorcycle Center took place on a perfect May morning that felt like the universe's stamp of approval on everything they'd built. The expanded facility sparkled in the spring sunlight. 5 workshop bays, 2 classrooms, a parts and tool library, and a small museum displaying motorcycle history from 1903 to the present. But it was the people gathering in the courtyard, between the original shop and the new buildings, that truly represented the transformation that had taken place. Graham stood on the small platform they'd erected for the ceremony, looking out at an audience that would have seemed impossible to imagine a year ago. The 23 graduating students ranged in age from 16 to 67, representing everything from high school seniors earning dual credit to military veterans learning civilian trades, to retirees pursuing lifelong interests they'd never had time to explore. In the front row sat Mrs. Henderson, beaming with pride as her great-niece Sarah, named after Graham's late wife, prepared to receive recognition for completing the basic motorcycle maintenance certification. Sarah Henderson, 19 and fresh out of high school, had discovered a passion for mechanical work that surprised everyone except Julian, who'd insisted from her first day that she had the hands and the instincts to become an exceptional mechanic. Julian himself stood beside the platform, no longer the quiet teenager who'd helped his father survive day by day, but a confident young man who'd been accepted to the University of Wisconsin's engineering program with plans to return to Millbrook Valley as the center's director of educational programs. His transformation over the past year had been remarkable. From reluctant student to enthusiastic teacher to recognized expert in motorcycle education methodology. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "A year ago, this was just a struggling repair shop with big dreams and limited resources. Today, we're celebrating not just the completion of our first educational cohort, but the successful launch of a model that's being replicated in communities across the country." The applause was warm and sustained, but Graham's attention was drawn to a familiar figure in the back of the crowd. Vivian stood beside a vintage Harley-Davidson that had become symbolic of their partnership. The fully restored 1978 shovelhead that had brought them together, now gleaming like new but carrying the wisdom of its years. She'd driven it from Milwaukee that morning, a 2-hour journey that had become her preferred way of transitioning between her corporate responsibilities and her community commitments. The past 6 months had proven that their unlikely partnership could not only survive, but thrive in ways neither had anticipated. Vivian had successfully convinced Harley-Davidson's board to invest in 17 similar community centers across the United States, creating a network of educational facilities that preserve traditional craftsmanship while preparing students for modern motorcycle technology careers. The Millbrook Valley Center had become the flagship of the program, hosting visitors from motorcycle manufacturers, vocational education experts, and community development organizations around the world. More importantly, the center had fulfilled Sarah's original vision of creating a gathering place for motorcycle culture that transcended simple commercial transactions. The workshop bays hosted weekend ride planning sessions, vintage bike restoration clubs, and women's maintenance groups that had grown from Vivian's encouragement of female participation in traditionally male-dominated spaces. The museum displayed not just motorcycles, but the stories of the people who rode them, creating a living archive of American transportation and freedom culture. But the real measure of our success, Graham continued, isn't in the beautiful facilities you see around us or even in the partnerships that made them possible. It's in the 23 individuals who've proven that the combination of traditional craftsmanship and modern innovation can create opportunities that didn't exist before. He gestured toward the graduating students, each wearing a burgundy T-shirt emblazoned with the center's logo, a stylized wrench and gear surrounded by the words, "Building Community, One Bike at a Time." The design had been Julian's creation, approved enthusiastically by Vivian and adopted as the official symbol for all the community centers in the network. As Graham called each graduate's name and presented them with certificates of completion, he reflected on the individual stories that had brought them together. Tom Rodriguez, the construction foreman who discovered a talent for precision engine work and was starting his own vintage restoration business. Maria Santos, the single mother who'd parlayed her motorcycle maintenance skills into a job with the State Highway Department. David Chen, the retired engineer who'd found new purpose teaching carburetor theory to teenagers who'd never seen a mechanical fuel delivery system. Each certificate represented not just technical education, but personal transformation. people who discovered new capabilities, found supportive communities, or simply proven to themselves that it was never too late to learn something meaningful. The center had become what Sarah had envisioned, a place where fixing motorcycles was just the beginning of fixing lives. When the formal presentations concluded, the gathering naturally transitioned into the kind of informal celebration that had become traditional at center events. Food trucks from around the county served lunch in the courtyard, while students and faculty demonstrated restoration techniques, discussed ongoing projects, and shared stories about memorable repairs and challenging problems. Graham found himself gravitating toward a group of students clustered around Julian, who was explaining the finer points of electronic fuel injection systems to an audience that included both teenagers and grandparents. The sight filled Graham with a pride that went beyond simple parental satisfaction. Julian had evolved into the kind of teacher who could make complex subjects accessible without sacrificing accuracy or depth. "He's got a gift," Vivian said, appearing beside Graham, with 2 bottles of craft beer from a local brewery that had become one of the center's community partners. The university professors who visited have all commented on his teaching ability. He's going to revolutionize motorcycle education. Graham accepted the beer gratefully, noting that Vivian had changed from her corporate attire into the work clothes she preferred when visiting the center. The transformation from CEO to community partner had become as natural as breathing for her, a fluid shift between worlds that had initially seemed incompatible. "The board meeting went well?" Graham asked, recognizing the satisfaction in her expression. "Better than well," Vivian replied, her eyes bright with excitement. "We approved funding for 10 more centers over the next 2 years, including partnerships with community colleges in 3 states. The program is becoming self-sustaining through student enrollment, corporate sponsorships, and local community support." The success had surprised even Vivian's most optimistic projections. What had begun as an experimental partnership between corporate resources and grassroots expertise had proven that authentic community engagement could produce both social value and business sustainability. The centers generated revenue through education programs, parts sales, and restoration services, while providing jobs, skills training, and cultural preservation that strengthened local economies. "There's something else," Vivian continued, reaching into her jacket pocket. "Something I wanted to share with you before making any public announcements." Graham raised an eyebrow as she handed him an official-looking document. "What's this?" "My resignation letter from Harley-Davidson," she said simply. "Effective at the end of the fiscal year." Graham stared at the letter, his mind racing through the implications. "Vivian, you can't just walk away from everything you've built there. The community center program, the partnerships, all the progress you've made isn't going anywhere," she interrupted gently. "I've spent the past 3 months training my replacement and ensuring that the community partnership program is permanently integrated into the company's strategic planning. The work will continue and expand, but it doesn't need me to oversee it anymore." Graham looked up from the letter, meeting her eyes with a mixture of surprise and concern. "What are you going to do?" Vivian's smile was radiant. "I'm going to become the full-time director of the Community Motorcycle Center Network," she said. "I'm going to help communities like Millbrook Valley create the kind of educational and cultural institutions that preserve what's valuable while building pathways to the future." The announcement hit Graham with unexpected force. For the past 6 months, he'd grown accustomed to Vivian's divided attention, her careful balance between corporate responsibilities and community commitments. The idea of her full-time presence, her complete investment in the world they'd built together, felt almost too good to be true. "And there's something else," Vivian continued, her voice dropping to something more personal. "I've been thinking, About what it means to build a life instead of just managing one. About what it looks like to choose community over career advancement, relationships over professional recognition. She paused, studying Graham's face carefully. I'd like to make Millbrook Valley my permanent home. If that's something you think you could be comfortable with, not just as a business partner, but as someone who wants to build a future here, with you and Julian and whatever community we can create together. Graham felt his breath catch in his throat. Over the past months, their relationship had deepened into something that felt both natural and miraculous, but they'd avoided discussing long-term plans, as if speaking about permanence might somehow jinx the delicate balance they'd achieved. Now Vivian was offering not just commitment, but the kind of leap of faith that Sarah had always said was necessary for real love. I think, Graham said carefully, that Sarah would say it's about time. I stopped being so careful about good things. Vivian laughed, the sound bright and clear in the spring air. Is that a yes? That's a yes to all of it, Graham replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. To you staying, to building something permanent together, to taking whatever risks come, with believing that good things can last. Julian's voice, calling for attention, interrupted the moment, and they turned to see him standing on a workbench, addressing the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd found his calling. Before everyone heads home, Julian announced, I wanted to share something that represents what this place means to all of us. He gestured toward the museum entrance, where a new display case had been installed. Inside, carefully positioned, under protective glass, sat an old transistor radio, the same one he'd repaired months ago, now accompanied by a small plaque. This radio belonged to my mother, Sarah Parker, Julian said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. She dreamed about creating a place where people could learn, share skills, and build community around the things they loved. She didn't live to see that dream realized, but every person who's learned something here, every bike that's been restored, every friendship that's been formed, all of it is part of her legacy. He paused, his eyes finding Graham and Vivian in the crowd. But the most important thing she taught us is that the best dreams aren't the ones you achieve alone. They're the ones that bring other people together and create something bigger than any individual could build. The applause was spontaneous and heartfelt, but Graham barely heard it. He was thinking about Sarah's business card, still tucked away in his desk drawer, with its message about being ready to be bigger than their fears. He was thinking about the journey from survival to abundance, from isolation to community, from protecting what remained to building what could be. As the celebration continued around them, Graham and Vivian stood together in the courtyard of something impossible made real. The shovelhead that had brought them together gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, no longer a symbol of breakdown and repair, but of restoration and renewal. Around them, students and teachers, young and old, experienced and novice, shared knowledge and stories, and the kind of authentic community that had become increasingly rare in a digital world. Julian joined them, his graduation speech complete, his future bright with possibilities that honored the past while embracing change. So, he said, with the grin that reminded Graham so much of Sarah, what do we build next? Graham looked at his son, then at Vivian, then at the bustling community they'd created together. Whatever needs building, he said simply. One bike, one student, one dream at a time. The spring evening settled gently over Millbrook Valley as the celebration gradually wound down. Visitors departed with promises to return. Students made plans for advanced coursework, and the core community that had gathered around the center's mission prepared for whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. And in the workshop bay, where it all began, the old transistor radio played softly, broadcasting hope and possibility into a world that still needed both, one song at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.